We're in the middle of a world energy crisis, and the headlines are ringing, of course, about energy bills in Europe, about the boosting of inflation across the world, a lot of other problems. A few reasons for the Europe-centered energy crisis. Most of what you hear is COVID disruptions and supply chains, and then also Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But there's a couple other issues and reasons that are just as big. First, the underinvestment in oil and gas exploration and drilling over the last few years, and then Europe's green energy policies. Okay, there we go. So world exploration and drilling was about $500 billion in 2010, went all the way up to $800 billion in 2014, and then maybe we had a little bit of an overinvestment, we had prices decline. But since then, exploration and drilling has been falling all the way down to only $300 billion in 2020. And part of the reason is there are many world leaders saying we can't invest in oil and gas anymore. Faith Birol, Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, has said if governments are serious about the climate crisis, there can be no new investments in oil, gas, and coal from now. We've had an oil price recovery. Back in April 2020, the U.S. set a near-term record for low mileage driven. It was down like 40% back to 1950 levels. Crude oil price, $20 a barrel and lower. But as the world economies have recovered, those oil prices have recovered. And prior to the invasion of Ukraine, about the end of 2021, we were up about $80 a barrel. I checked this morning, I think it's about 90 or so. Now, over the last 2 decades, Europe has become very dependent on intermittent energy sources, wind and solar, and also natural gas. More than 100 nuclear plants have been closed in Europe over the last 2 decades. 34 in United Kingdom, 30 in Germany. And 23 nations of Europe have said we're not going to use coal anymore. They've all signed a pledge. And so you can see that electricity from wind, solar, and natural gas has become dominant. 63% of the electricity in Italy, 78% in Netherlands, 64% in the UK. And beyond that, another issue is that most of the natural gas is imported. Europe's natural gas production has been falling for several decades now. So by 2021, 63% of the gas was imported, and much of that from Russia. Back in 2017, the European Union did a study and said that there were more than 40 shale fields in Europe that contained oil and gas. Matter of fact, there's a huge one called the Finno-Scandian Shield from the Baltic nations here all the way across the top of Europe into England. But the continent has decided to frack none of those fields, basically. They've decided to rely on imports and on renewables. And another crazy thing happened during the year 2021. The wind didn't blow much in Europe. These graphs are for France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, which showed that electricity output from wind and solar was down, from wind was down 20 to 30% for the year. And so what did Europe do? Well, they burned natural gas. And by the end of the year, the supplies of natural gas were very low. And so Europe's natural gas prices exploded. The prices were 13 to 18 euros per megawatt hour back in 2020 and early 21. By December of 2021, that price had gone up to 80 euros per megawatt hour. That was 3 months before the Ukraine invasion, up by a factor of 5. And then it has skyrocketed since. I checked the other day, it's at about 113 or so. Still up 7 or 8 times what it was a couple years ago. Same thing has happened with electricity. By December of 2021, the price of electricity was up by a factor of 6. And that has not come down yet. That's still up about 10 times. And as a result, we've had a step function reduction in the standard of living in Europe. In Hungary, they're now putting wood stoves in schools because they're afraid we won't have enough natural gas this winter. Germany is shutting off lights. In England, they want you to shower with a friend, or not to bathe at all. And the household electric bills of Europe may get as far as $5,000. Now, the government is trying to constrain those, but that's what the market price would do. We are seeing the destruction of European industry. Uniper, the big gas importer in Germany, had an 18 billion euro loss the first 9 months of the year. Then the government acquired it, but they're still losing money, as much as 100 million euros a day. And so the tab for the German government is going to approach 80 billion euros, they think. Fertilizer production down 70%. Fertilizer, of course, uses natural gas. And smelting, a big problem. More than half of aluminum and zinc production closed. To produce a ton of aluminum requires about 15 megawatt hours. And the price of that recently was about 7,000 or 8,000 euros. You could sell a ton of aluminum for 2,500 euros. So unless you had long-term contracts for supply, and when those contracts run out, you have to close your facility. And so huge cost increases in chemicals, glass, steel, food processing, paper industries. Ron talked already about 20 facilities closed in Europe, steel facilities, idled or closed. Aperam, for example, was in the press recently. They said their energy prices for their stainless steel facility are up by a factor of 10. They pay in 1 month now what they used to pay in a year. ArcelorMittal facility shut down France, Germany, Poland, and Spain. And again, Ron showed some of the import situation. From 2020 to 2021, steel imports into Europe rose 20%. And this year, they're up 40% over 2021. So a big, big problem. And globally, we've seen that the world has followed in many cases. The price of natural gas in Asia is almost as high as in Europe. And in the US, any gas producer is trying to ship it over to that liquefied natural gas facility, ship it to Europe, and make huge, huge profits. Even though the price of gas in the US is maybe doubled or maybe up by 3, but much smaller amount.